And studying this week and getting this message ready, I must admit it was very challenging on myself personally because it's finding ourselves in it, because we started a series last week about grace. Because when you discover the message of grace, you recognize it's almost too good to be true. But it is true. And so here's the tension that we've been looking at. Why is it today that people love Jesus, but not so much his followers? Why is it today that people love to hear about Jesus, but not so much the church? Why is that? Have we missed something? Have we lost something? Have we misunderstood? Because I believe our primary message, the most important task we have, is to communicate the subject of grace. And so we're going to look at it today in one of the most famous stories that Jesus ever told. If you're not a Bible reader, if this is your first time here, we're so glad you're here today. And you probably have heard this story, whether you've ever been around the church community or much not. But if you've never, we're going to look at this story found in the Gospel of Luke. If you have a Bible today, turn to the Gospel of Luke. If you're brand new to Bible reading, all you have to do, find the New Testament. And the New Testament starts with 4 different books, eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus Christ. Luke, he was a Greek doctor. He was an associate of Paul. He took the responsibility to carefully sit down and gather the eyewitness testimonies of all the people who saw the events take place. And he took it upon himself to give a careful recording of it. And so Luke, in telling this story, many of us have heard it, but maybe just this, maybe we've never really understood it. So let's turn to the book of Luke, chapter 15. And let's set it up this way because it's important to understand who Jesus was communicating with. Luke writes and says this: "Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." Now look at what Luke is pointing out to is that here were the drug dealers, here were the prostitutes, here were the crack addicts, here were the mafia, or whatever you would define. See, what's interesting in ancient Judaism, tax collectors weren't even given the dignity of being called sinners. They had a category all by themselves. And we all have special ways of looking at certain people and labeling them in some way. Because if you were a tax collector, it's over. There is absolutely no help for you. But what's fascinating when you hear, who are they gathering to hear? Jesus. So somehow, these individuals that were far away from God were attracted to Jesus. They wanted to be around Jesus. And now this is something that's interesting. Because as a follower of Christ, if you are a Christ follower, what does it mean to be a Christ follower? A follower means someone that you aspire to be like, that you model your life after, that their values and their way of life is something that you look to grow in and to become like. And so this is the way I evaluate myself, that until people who are far away from God are attracted to me, feel comfortable around me, feel like I am a safe place to be around, then I'm not yet like Jesus. Because people who are far away from God wanted to be around Jesus, and here's the other fascinating reality: Jesus wanted to be around them. But now that's not all that the audience that's here, because look at verse 2. It said, "But the Pharisees and teachers of the law." Who are we talking about? In that day, religious people. We're talking about people who are churchgoers. Because the other group of people were irreligious. They weren't churchgoers. They didn't go to the synagogue. They were forbidden from the temple. They weren't a part of the religious life of Israel. But they wanted to be around Jesus. And what was fascinating was this, that the people who were used to church, the religious folks, they had a difficulty with the other crowd of people being around Jesus. And more importantly, they had difficulty that Jesus wanted to be around them. And so what did they do? They muttered. They whispered. They talked. Because remember I told you last week, grace is offensive to some folks. It's difficult. It's challenging. And so they muttered. This was their thing. This man welcomes sinners and does what? Eats with them. See, in ancient Judaism, to eat with somebody was a pure understanding of acceptance. And here's where we struggle. Because unconditionally, we talked about that last week, unconditionally, we are to accept all people, but acceptance doesn't mean approval. But you and I need to understand this because we struggle with these ends. And here was their struggle. Because when you see the Gospels, when you read the Bible, especially the Gospels, the story of Jesus, you will find these encounters where Jesus encounters both religious people and irreligious people. Otherwise outcasts, people who are not a part of the religious community. And whenever you find those two contrasted, where they're juxtaposition to each other, like we talked about last week, when in the home of Simon the Pharisee, a sexual outcast was there. That it's fascinating. The outcast tends to connect with Jesus and the religious person doesn't. Whether in John's gospel, he tells the story of Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night, but in the fourth chapter, the next chapter, he deals with a social outcast, a woman of Samaria who had been divorced 5 times and now is just shacked up with somebody. And the amazing reality is this social outcast connects with Jesus and the religious person doesn't. Or whether it's a political outcast, like Matthew would tell, that Jesus walked by his tax collecting booth and said, follow me. And then where does he say, where are we going? To your home to eat. And all the religious folks sat outside, had a difficulty with that. But the irreligious folks, the outcasts, connect to Jesus. And the people who are religious sometimes did not. So here are these two groups of people come to listen to Jesus. And you got to set it up. Who was Jesus speaking to? Look at this next verse, verse 3. It said, and Jesus told them this parable. So in other words, the comments that Jesus is to make, his audience is 2 groups, and he's going to help reach both groups. Because why? The story that we're going to look at, the most famous of all stories, historically we've called the story of the prodigal son. And I don't know why we had referenced it that way, because when we look at it today, we're going to look at it as a story really of 2 boys. Because Jesus was speaking to both segments of his audience. And it tells us this because it is the story of humanity. It is the understanding that there are 2 approaches to life. 2 ways that people attempt to find happiness and fulfillment in life. And it is the story of humanity because the way in which people in our times, and it has been for all years, this tension has existed among humanity. And it might have existed right in your own family because the 2 ways that people attempt to, the one is self-discovery. People say, you know what? Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to go out. I'm going to experience life. I'm going to go for all the gusto. I don't need you telling me what's wrong. I'm going to go out and experiment. I'm going to go out and see what life has to offer me. And we call them free spirits. It's a self-discovery. I want to understand for myself. So whether they leave home and move to Greenwich Village or somewhere in LA, they have this way of going about life where they're just like, who are you to tell me, right? But then you have the other side of the people who attempt to find it through moral conformity. They're going to live according to social standards. They're going to live, usually in families, it kind of breaks down this way. Usually the older kids try to live like the parents, take care of the parents, and it's usually the last born. It's usually the youngest that says, listen, I've had it with you guys. I'm going to go out and do life on my own. And you find this aspect where it's pitted. And it is the issue, the tensions that we deal with. And so currently in our time, it is this tension that is threatening to tear the fabric of our nation. Because it gives us the understanding of the 2 ways and approaches to life. Because you have a group of people in America who are moralists, who say the problem with the world are all of those people, all of those individuals. They're the problem with society. And we got it right. And where the other group is saying, no. Those narrow-minded, bigoted people, they're the problem with society. And it comes down to the tensions we deal with in our world between religious and irreligious people, between Democrats and Republicans, between liberals and conservatives. You want me to get even more? You can't go down the political road because it's either the feel the burn or dump the Trump. It is somewhere that is totally at odds with our nation because we're looking at ourselves across the aisle saying, those people over there, they're the problem. And it threatens us. And what Jesus begins to unfold to us is this story. And so look here, it says, Jesus continued in this third story. He says, there was a man who had what? 2 sons. So here, this story is about 2 boys. 2, listen to me, lost boys. Problem is, one of them didn't understand he was. But look at the younger son, which is generally where people identify on the story. The younger son said to his father, now you have to remember who Jesus is talking to. He's talking to Eastern mindset people, to Jewish people, okay? And one of the things that we don't quite understand in our culture, but it is huge in Eastern cultures. You go into places in the Middle East, you go into Japan, China, places where honor is huge. And it's about community. It's not just, don't shame me in front of the community, because to lose face, to lose honor in a society like that is huge. So the younger son says to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Now, generally speaking, when does someone get their inheritance? When their parents what? Die. So what he's saying, but he's looking, where is this happening? He's in the house. He's talking to his dad. It's hugely disrespectful. Basically what he's saying is, I don't want to play the game anymore. I don't want a relationship with you. I don't want to live under your rules. If I stay in this house any longer, I'm going to suffocate. I want what I believe is coming to me. I want your stuff. I just don't want you. So give me what I believe I have coming to me. Now, everyone in Jesus' audience would automatically assume that that boy would get what he got coming to him. In other words, his dad would look at him and say, I brought you into this life, and I'm about to take you out of this life. And give him the biggest beating he ever had, kick him out of the house, disinherit him, it's over, Rover, forget him. Okay? That's what everybody would be expecting. But what did the father do? Everybody's gasping, going, no way. So he what? Divided his property. Now look at this, between them. That's something that people miss in the details of this story. That both boys got their inheritance at that moment. But lock that in your memory for a second. The word property here, which is so interesting, in the Greek language is the word bios. B-I-O-S. And we get it today. That word in Greek means life. Okay? And to understand the culture in that time, people, their land, their estates was their very lives. So to give this, because the share of the estate that the younger brother would get would be 1/3 of the assets of the father, which were his property. So now it would require the father to go out and sell 1/3 of his land, so the whole community would know what was going on. Now there's a huge diminishing of his esteem, of his value, of who he was within the community. It's huge. Who would ever do that? Here's where we miss who's the subject of the story. It is to understand God. Here, the word prodigal means a spendthrift. It's someone who's lavish. It's someone who's excessive. And what I would beg to you to understand, that the story is about a prodigal God. A God who is lavish, a God who is awesome, because we tend to use it in the negative term. Someone who's just spent that they waste everything. But here God is so lavish. Nobody understands it. Jesus' audience is shocked. He divides the property and he gives it to him because, listen, whether you believe it or not, God has never attempted to control you. God was giving you a freedom to choose, and he will always stand behind your right to choose for yourself. It may break his heart. Why did the Father give them to him? Why did he do it? Because he loved him. Love never attempts to control people. Love gives freely. It's the most vulnerable. It's the most heartbreaking. But because the Father loved him, he gave to him. Because listen, if there was any chance he left the setting, that the son would know, I freely gave to you. My desire is that hopefully one day you will come home. He didn't run after him. He didn't conform him and say, you have to. So if we were to break this story down, here's the deal. If you understand this story, it's beautiful. There's 2 acts that's important. This is Act 1, Scene 1. Now let's go to Act 1, Scene 2. And look what happens. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had. In other words, that's what he wanted. And what did he do? He set off for a distant country. And there, he squandered all his wealth in wild living. That's what he wanted to do, right? He said, wild living. What does that mean? I don't think I need to fill in the blank. But honestly, that's the perpetual spring break, okay? It's debauchery to the max. It's like, hey, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so what? And if you live that way, you will squander. You'll make stupid mistakes. You may not do today, you may not do tomorrow, but eventually, okay? You get to a point, what happens to this boy, look at verse 14, and you may be there. It said, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine, and that the whole country, and he began to be in need. You live that life, eventually, life catches up with you. And that's often when so many people in life, when life has basically come back around, when you have recognized how hard and fast you've tried to live it, the fact is you can't control it, and it gets the best of you, and you find yourself in need. See, nobody needs to be told that. Guess what, guys? Lectures don't change people. They didn't for me as a kid. I don't know why we think that it will do it today. The Father allowed the freedom for this boy, and what he discovered, because there's two ways to learn in life. You can either learn from somebody who loves you, who knows better, or you can learn the hard way by finding life's hardness on your own. And so guess what? He found himself in need. Look at this, verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. Again, remember Jesus' audience? They're Jewish. You figure, what's the low level of the totem pole that someone could fall? What's the worst job you could ever have, okay? To his audience, they're all thinking, well, he got what he got coming to him, okay? Sure enough, right? And so he's in this place feeding pigs. And so look at verse 16. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Sad part about it, culture and life as we live it, grace is almost non-existent. We live in graceless culture. You made your bed, you got to lie in it. You're out. In fact, the fascinating part, outside of the God of the Bible, outside of Jesus, ancient society knew nothing about grace. Because if you found yourself on hard times, then the gods were mad at you. This is what you had coming to you. There was no such thing as welfare. There was no such thing as helping out your fellow man. It was, that's what you got coming. That's your bed. Lie in it. You got it. And this is, so look at, but no one gave him anything. So verse 17. And then he came to his senses. Now here's something interesting. People never change till they come to the conclusions on their own. It may break your heart, but when you love people, you realize, listen to me, parents, do you love your children? Yes. One of the things that you do a disservice to your kids, because it tears any parent's heart out of their chest, tears it apart to see your kids fail, to see your kids on hard times. But when you shield your kids from the circumstances of life, you keep them from growing up. You keep them from coming to their senses. You keep them. And as much as it makes it, well, compassion. The Father allowed him to go. He had to come, because to care about people is to understand that down deep, they'll never change until they realize they need to. No alcoholic will ever stop being one till they first admit, I am one. That's the first step to recovery, is when you admit, I'm in need and no one can help me but Almighty God. He came to his senses and said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. Verse 18. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, so he's concocting a plan. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Verse 19. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of what? Your hired servants. Now why? Why is that important? Because see, he not only shamed his dad and wasted his dad's estate, which was huge, he also shamed the community. And so therefore his plan was, I will return and I will work off my debt. I will go back and repay my debt to society. I will come back and say, please hire me so that I can earn money and give you back, pay you back. Over time, may I get back into your good graces. So in other words, his plan was to, because all rabbis in that day taught something called restitution. The way that you get back into the good graces is you make restitution. So this was his plan. So he goes, what? Look at the next verse. This is now Act 1, Scene 3. So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off. Now this is important to catch. His father what? Saw him. So in other words, if his father saw him, that means he had to what? Be looking for him. See, the father had longed for this day to come. The father had desired. Imagine how awkward it was for his son. And maybe some of you, this is your first time in church in a long time. And you've wondered and you've wondered and you've wondered. And maybe desperation or need has brought you here today. And it's been hard to swallow and say, I'm not sure how I'm going to be received. I'm not sure what God thinks about me. Let me assure you of this. Your Father in heaven has longed for this day. He has desired to see this time come. And what does his dad do? He saw him, and now imagine Jesus' audience. This is a patriarchal society. How does the head of the family operate? Well, usually, it's kind of like I was raised in an Italian family. When you went to see the head of the Italian family, you always had to go to the head of the house who was sitting in the chair, and you'd say to him, "Sto bene." Okay, in other words, how are you? Bene, gracias. You know, you had to go back. You had to kind of like almost kiss the ring. You come home, okay? Especially if you have shamed the family, everybody expects him to grovel in on his feet, kiss the feet of his dad, and beg him to forgive him. But what happens? This guy, the prodigal nature of the father, astounds everyone who's there because why? He was filled with compassion for him. And what did he do? He couldn't contain himself. He ran to his son. Nobody in ancient days could understand this because women might run, your cousin might run, your brother might run, but your daddy never ran. You ran to dad. He never ran to you. But let me assure you that your Father in heaven has longed to wrap his arms around you. And he said, what? What did he do? He ran to his son, threw his arms around him. Now stop for a moment. What was his occupation? He was feeding pigs, right? Imagine what he smelled like. The dad didn't say, excuse me, catch a quick shower, I'll give you a hug later. Get cleaned up. But why do we allow ourselves to think that I got to get my life together, I got to clean up my act before I go back to the house of God? Like it's possible that we can even do that. It's a lie that we bought into. Your Father has longed to wrap his arms around you and said what? And kissed him, even though he smelled, even though he didn't have anything straightened out at that moment. Right there on the spot, he met the prodigal nature of the Father in heaven. And so what did he do next? Then his son said to him, so he goes through his plan. Okay, so I'm going to get back into good graces. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Okay? And so what? But the father said to his servants, what? Quick, bring the best robe. The father didn't even let him get through his full plan. He said, bring the best robe. What would be the best robe in the house? It would be the father's robe. So in other words, he's saying to one of the servants, go up in my room, find my best robe, bring it down here and put it around him. Bring the best robe and put it on him. Then next, again, Jesus' audience is gasping because he says, put a ring on his finger. What did that mean? A ring represented a signet. In other words, he was reinstating him to full sonship. He was giving him power of attorney. That ring could be used to spend the father's assets again. Are you kidding me? He hasn't worked for anything. How do you even know that he's sincere? Are you kidding me? But yet the father restores him to full rights of sonship. And he says, listen, put sandals on his feet. In other words, he ain't no slave. He is my son. And then he says this, the next verse. Bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let's have a feast and celebrate. Why? For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. I would say to you, see, in ancient times, meat was a huge delicacy. It wasn't a part of their staple of their food diet. In fact, when you would hold a feast, the grandest of all feasts would be a fatted calf. This was the biggest celebration this family had ever put on. This was the cat's meow. This was it. This was the party to be at. Everyone in the community was welcome. Everybody was having a good time. There was feasting. There was rejoicing. There was celebration. Why? Because the son that was once dead to this community has come back and he's been restored. And we're throwing a huge party. Are you kidding? That is the prodigal nature of the Father. Now listen, you would think, we all think in our Western sensitivities that Jesus' audience is all melted to tears. No, they're thunderstruck. They're offended. They're going, where is justice in that? He shamed his father. He wasted 1/3 of their estate. How could the father act in said manner? But that's not the end of the story. In fact, God is free to forgive. God is free to pardon. But to only stay on the first part is to totally not understand the gospel whatsoever. Because listen to me. Forgiveness is always free to the recipient, but never to the person who gives it. Let me give you an illustration. You lend somebody your iPhone. They're using your phone and they break it. You have two choices. You can either make them pay you back, or you can forgive them and pay for it yourself. Or let me get a little more personal. Somebody destroys your reputation. Somebody leaves you high and dry. They're while living, divorced you, left you with kids, kept you in a situation of near poverty, and then they return and want you. You have a choice. You can either make them grovel and try to earn your respect back, or you can forgive them. That is huge. So, Act 2 is critical to understanding this story. Because why? Look what happens in Act 2. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. Now, when the father divided the estate, did the oldest son get his share? Well, we already saw that, right? So for the father to reinstate the youngest son, do you know what he just did to the oldest son's estate? He just diminished it by 1/3. Forgiveness costs huge. Watch. So meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and while he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. And so what happened? So he called one of the servants and asked him, yo, dude, what's going down? I didn't get no Twitter text. I didn't get no Instagram invite. Where am I? Come on. What's going down? What's happening? What's the lowdown? So look at this, verse 27. Your brothers come, he replied, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has them back safe and sound. And the oldest brother goes, oh my goodness, my lost brother, my father has longed for this day. I am filled with joy. I am so thankful to Almighty God for bringing my brother back safe and sound. This is the greatest day of my life. This is the most joyous moment I've ever experienced. Oh, wait a minute, I must have read another. That must be the Message translation. No, listen. Because what happened next? The older brother, what? Became what? Angry. He was upset about it. And what did he do? He refused to go in. Now, why is that significant? Because look at what happens next. So the father went out and pleaded with him. Now, you have to understand, in ancient times, if the host of a feast leaves the room, all festivities come to a halt. So now you have the entire community watching this event. So now the oldest son is about to disrespect his father publicly, because you know what his expression is? What he is saying to not only his father, but to everybody around, my father is wrong. This is my vote of no confidence. You didn't even consult me. You have no right to do this. This is wrong. I don't believe in it. I think this is wrong, and I want everybody to know that I am not in agreement with you. You are out of your mind. That's what he was saying to his father by doing that. But notice what the father did. He pleaded with him. Why? Because his heart was that he would come into the feast. But look at verse 29. But he answered his father. Look, he didn't even say father. Didn't even see esteemed father. He said, look, in other words, he said, look, you. He wouldn't even call him by name. Have you ever been so angry that you lose sight of who somebody is? They are so wrong, and they need to know how much you revile what they have done, that you won't even give them the dignity of their name. You call them something else. You call them a liberal. You call them something else that you label them with. And now you won't even give them the dignity of who their birth name was or what their position in humanity is. You have it that you're right, they're wrong, and they need to understand how wrong they are. So he's saying this to his dad. Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet, you never gave me even a young goat. Now listen, he tells why he had been slaving his dad all those years. It wasn't for the delight of his dad. He had his own interest at heart. And what did he expect? He expected that his father owed him. See, one of the easiest ways to not deal with Jesus is to just be good. One of the ways to avoid Jesus is to be good, because then you don't need him. And religious people do that all the time. Because why? This guy felt that his obedience was not based on the delight of his dad, but on his own interests. And he now reveals that, because when life doesn't go your way, when situations don't happen the way you expect they go, when your prayers don't get answered in the fashion you do, what you discover is what's really inside of you at times that you're not willing to admit to anybody, but it comes out because what you have in you will come out of you at some point. And here, he said, yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. And so how did the father act towards him? Here's the point. The oldest son, Act 2, Scene 1, absolutely confronts the dad, says, that's it. You are wrong, and I want everybody to know how wrong you are. How did the father act? Did he disown him? Did he throw him off and immediately disinherit him in that moment? How did the father respond to the oldest? The same way he responded to the youngest. He said, but no, but look at this. I didn't finish this part of it. But look at this, how hard-hearted we can be. But when this son of yours, what did he do by that statement? He disowned his brother. See, whenever you feel superior to somebody else, you won't forgive them, because it's impossible to forgive somebody you feel superior to. He disowned him. Is that my brother? No, that ain't my brother. I know what they're marching down that street parading. I ain't got nothing to do with any of those people. And we have lost the commonality of our human dignity. That we were all, last time I checked, made in the image and likeness of God. When this son of yours, who has squandered your property with what? Prostitute. How would he know that? Guess what? In his day, there were no social media. Nobody sent him a Twitter saying, I saw your brother. He didn't get no text. There was no Skype. How did he know? I always thought about it. Maybe that's how he would have spent the money. I don't know. Because there's a lot of repressed people that are angry at the world because they seem to be having more fun than them. And their religion constrains them instead of the joy and love of a father. Because look, property with the prostitutes comes home. You kill the fatted calf for him. So that, now let's go to Act 2, Scene 2. How did the father respond? My son. He gives him the dignity of saying, listen, I love you. I love you just as much as I love him. Why is it one or the other? Why can't you understand my heart? That I've longed for this day. I want you to rejoice with me. And the father said, you are always with me. And everything I have is yours. Why do we think we have to earn something? Why do we think we have to get God to serve us? When God says, everything, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Why do you beg? Why do you say, well, I did good this week, so God owes me something in life? We have missed the gospel altogether, because look at what happened. He said, But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now remember, Jesus' audience, two different peoples, two different groups, right? This was Jesus appealing to the religious folks, to the Pharisees, to the teachers of the law. He's saying, please come in. Please swallow your pride. Please embrace your brothers. This is a day of rejoicing that these that have been estranged have actually come home. This should not be a day of grumbling. This should not be a day of complaining. This is not insider trading. This is something that you and I need to be rejoicing about. This brother of yours was dead and now is alive again. Why would we not celebrate? So Jesus never actually resolves the tension. As the master storyteller, he never tells us whether or not the older brother chooses to come in or not. And it's that open invitation to all of the religious folks that listen. My prodigal nature is just as abundant towards you as it was toward your younger brother. But listen, this story represents the story of the gospel. It is in truth the understanding of grace in a way that we need to see it. Because again, the two paths represented by these two boys, neither one of these paths led to the Father. Neither one of them, they both wanted, listen to me, they both wanted the same thing, they just went about it in different ways. Where the younger one more flagrantly said, I want what I want, and outwardly disobeyed, the oldest one thought through his obedience that he could actually have leverage on his father, that his father owed him something. See, in other words, he wanted his father's property every bit as much as the youngest one did. He just went about getting it in a different way. He said through his obedience wasn't about the delight of his dad. Neither son loved their father for their father's sake. Neither one of them longed to have a relationship with the father. They just wanted his stuff. And churches are filled with people who want God's stuff, but necessarily may not want God's heart. And what Jesus is saying is both roads are a dead end. Both ways don't lead to where you ultimately want to go. But what is the story here? Jesus is teaching us something. Jesus is showing us something. He's redefining sin. Because sin, as we technically know it, is breaking the rules. Jesus said sin is not just breaking the rules, it's putting yourself in the place of God. What do you mean by that? Well, listen, as long as you have bought into the idea that somehow good people go to heaven, then you have believed the idea that somehow you can save yourself. You don't need a savior because as long as you're good enough, God owes you access into heaven. God owes you a good life. God owes you in this life. Whether we understand it or not, the heart can be deceptively wicked and not even understand that the things that we're going through, what Jesus is teaching here, is that it's not just about breaking the rules. It's about the answer to why do we do good in the first place. Because the heart of sin is selfishness. And many times we do the right thing for the wrong reasons, whether we want to admit it or not. The deeper level is to understand, because why? There are a lot of people who do good in this life, and they're doing good as they want the applause of others. They want people to pat them on their back. They want something back in return. And the way you detect, the way you understand whether or not you're in that category is when life doesn't go your way, when people don't go the way you thought they should go. You get angry like the oldest boy. You figure, this is not fair. That's the mantra of people who live legalistically. This is not fair. Somehow God needs to be fair and give me what I deserve. And the gospel is the opposite. Jesus doesn't divide the world into good people and bad people. Why? Because Jesus was asked the question one day, "Good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? There is no one good but God." That's hard to swallow. That's difficult for us to come to grips with. Jesus didn't divide the world into good people and bad people. Here's the gospel. Let me make it so simple, so plain. The gospel says everyone is wrong, and at the same time, everyone is loved. And everyone is called to recognize that and change. In other words, here's what he's saying. Jesus doesn't divide it into good and bad, because why? Older brothers look at the world through this paradigm. They look at the lens and say, here's the good people, here's the bad people. The problem with the world is all of those bad people over there. They're making my taxes go up. They're making my society a problem. They're making my life have agita. I gotta walk in the mall and look at all of the debauchery of my time. That's the problem in our world. It's the bad people over there. But yeah, at the same time, the younger brothers do the same thing, because the younger brothers say, the tolerant, open-minded people, they're the good ones. And the bigoted, narrow-minded people, they're the problem with the world. That's the problem. You see, a newspaper in London, the London Times, years ago, put an editorial page out where the editor of the paper put this question. He said, what is wrong with our world? And I love this, because the Catholic theologian who was living in London, G.K. Chesterton, wrote the editor of the paper back and said, in response to your question, I am, signed, G.K. Chesterton. I said to somebody the other day, do you want to know what's wrong with the world? And where we were at, I said, listen, come over here. Come stand right next to me. We were in front of a mirror. I said, look in the mirror right there. See those two people? That's what's wrong with our world. You see, until you and I discover that we don't need to be a part of the problem, as long as you weigh in on the side that somehow it's those people over there, instead of recognizing that inside of us there is stuff that is unsavory, there are things that we don't see, that even the reasons why we do sometimes the things that we do, that the problems are that many times we're motivated by selfishness, we're motivated by error. We think God owes us something in this life, and we look at other people as the problem instead of looking through the paradigm of how God looks at the world, that everybody's wrong. We're all in this. I'm not superior to you. I don't have anything over you. And everyone's loved. When you have that grip your heart, when you recognize that God loves everyone the same. Like we said last week when we began this series, grace means God will never love me more or less than he does right now. When you live that way, you stop judging people because of what they do outwardly or by the things that they have inwardly. Because what is happening, what the dangerous area, when Jesus is dealing with the older brother, it was obvious that the younger brother hit hard times. And when people live wild, sometimes when they hit the wall head on, they know it. The problem and the more difficult and poisonous condition to deal with is the heart of the older brother. Why? Because he doesn't recognize that he is self-righteous, that he is lost in his own way. What does it mean to be spiritually lost? See, he was so hardened, he didn't even see life as his father saw it. The question that he never asked is, why do I do good? Do I do good for good's sake? Do I do good for the bigger question? Do I do this for God's sake? Do I do it for people's sake? Or do I do it for my own sake? Do I do it in an attempt to control my world? Because I'm a good boy, life's gonna go my way. I'm gonna get promoted in work. I'm gonna have this go on for me, that go on for me. That the reason sometimes that we can do good can be for the wrong reasons altogether, and we can find ourselves lost. Let me illustrate it to you in a story. It's an apocryphal story. And here it is. Jesus says to his disciples one day, I want you to carry a stone for me. So immediately the pragmatist Peter says, you know what? He finds the smallest stone he can find. Jesus didn't designate, he didn't say what size or weight it needed to be, so he found the smallest stone he could and put it in his pocket. And when everybody had gotten a stone, Jesus took them on a journey. And as they journeyed for a while, about lunchtime, he had them all sit down on the grass. He said, pull out your stone, please. He waved his hand over it, and immediately their stone became bread. Now, Peter's lunch was over almost instantly. And when everybody else had finished eating, Jesus said, okay, everybody get up. Will you carry a stone for me? Peter said, aha, I understand the system. So he went out to find the biggest stone he could carry, almost boulder size. It was breaking his back to put it on. And Jesus said, now, follow me. So Peter was having trouble keeping up because on their journey, he's carrying this huge, massive stone. And then around evening time, they come to the side of a river, and Jesus says, okay, everybody, throw your stone in the river. All the disciples are totally dumbfounded, especially Peter, who's almost broken by the weight of the stone he was carrying. And they have a problem. Now, Jesus, knowing their thoughts, says to them, did you do what I asked? And they all said to him, Master, of course we did. Yes, we did what you asked. He said, well, then the question is, Who did you carry the stone for? You or me? See, what's happening here, when you realize when you're lost, you get angry. You become resentful. Life isn't fair. You look at other people. In fact, you have so much difficulty forgiving other people because you think they should get what they got coming to them. They are the problem with our world, and it's a prison that we create because we've forgotten what God has forgiven us of. We have forgotten the whole message of grace, that God didn't give any of us what we deserve. But when we get lost, we forget. When we get lost, we get angry. When we get lost, we become hardened in our heart, and we stop seeing people as God sees them. And so what Jesus is causing his audience to do is to truly desire the real elder brother. Because Jesus had told 3 stories. And on your own, you can go back and read it. He told the first story. He said, the man had 100 sheep. One of them got lost and went astray. He went out immediately to look for that lost sheep. And when he found it, he put it on his shoulders, brought it home, and threw a big party. And then he explained that's the heartbeat of God. And then he said a woman had 10 coins and noticed one was missing. And she went on an all-out search everywhere in her home until she found that lost coin. And then she threw a huge party in celebration. And what he tells, in the 3 stories that he told, here are the things that are in common. In every story, something invaluable, something precious, something irreplaceable got lost. In all 3 stories, when what was invaluable, what was irreplaceable was found, there was a massive celebration. The only thing that's different about the 3rd story than the first 2 was there was no search. And it's sometimes maybe the reason why some of you are angry at God. Because you're saying, why hasn't God come after me? Who would have been the person responsible to search? See, the oldest son, the true elder brother, represented the father to the community. The eldest brother would know the father more intimately than anybody. They would be one because he would carry on the family name. He would say, if you have seen me, you have seen my Father. I represent my Father in every single way, because the only way that the youngest son could be brought home is at the expense of the eldest brother. But Jesus gives us the understanding that the true elder brother came from heaven and at his expense, because Jesus was the heir of creation. And when you find faith in Christ, he makes you joint heir with himself. Jesus came to bring us back home at his own expense. He said that he came to seek and save that which was lost. It would be the true elder brother that would be responsible to seek out and to search wherever it was, because knowing the heart of the Father, knowing how much it meant to the Father, you would want to do nothing more than to love your Father by doing what is important, what is valuable to your Father. If love is truly love, it is vulnerable in every way. And therefore, no matter what it costs me, therefore, no matter what people think of me, I'm going to go out, I'm going to tell people, I'm going to search for what is lost, and I'm going to bring it home. Listen, that longing to come home is inside of every human being. Because again, this is the whole story of man. God made us a home. Sin found us displaced from the place that was our home. And the whole Bible is a search to replace, to bring back home the children that were lost. That's why the end of the Bible goes with a celebration, the marriage supper of the Lamb. Jesus is telling in this story the heart of the Father, that he wants both children to home and to be celebrating in the party. That's what his heart is. He doesn't love one more than the other. He loves them both. That's why he pleaded with the older one to come in. The oldest one didn't even know that he was distanced from his father. But you and I need to recognize that our true elder brother came, and at his own expense, he made a way home for every single one of us. No matter where you are today, no matter what position you're in, whether you've been doing your own business or whether you've been playing the game and just being religious and coming to church and avoiding the realization of giving God your whole heart. You see, you can't find the saving grace, because this is what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say the good or the bad. He said this: the humble are in, the proud are out. Because why? Grace can only be received through humility. Only when you realize you need it. Because when you deny, you miss the whole message that all had fallen short of the glory of God. That every one of us needed what the older brother came to do. But when we think it's all right, because you know why? Only sick people go to the doctor. When you don't realize you are in the most dangerous place of all. And that's why Jesus showed the Father his pleading, come home. You see, the initiation, the love of the Father. Right now, if God has been moving in your heart, if you have felt anything in that way that shows that the Father loves you, he's been wooing you back. Because if you have allowed the gospel to be displaced in your life, if you have ever thought that the problem with our world is all the other people, and you have not recognized that the heart of the Father is to bring everyone back, that this is it. And the only thing, listen to me, the only thing that can change a human life is the gospel. Let me end with this story. Listen. This comes out of a short vignette from Vietnam after the war era. It takes place with two individuals. A guy named Cho, a young man, maybe 18, 19 years old, and a beautiful girl named Lan, the same age. Cho is in desperate poverty. He's a cyclo driver, which means he drives a rickshaw with a bicycle in front, okay? But he lives in poverty. He loves Lan immensely, but he can't afford her. She's a prostitute because she's beautiful. And she figures that prostitution may be her way out of the life. You see, she longs to be able to live in the hotels that she only visits but's never spent a night. And she wants desperately to live normal. She wants desperately to be a part of that world. But she finds her occupation to be grueling and enslaving her, and it doesn't provide it. So one day Cho enters into a race, and he wins the bicycle race and takes the top prize. So what does he do with the money that he gets? He goes that day and he rents a hotel room for the night. And he goes and pays for Lan's cost to her pimp so she can be with him. And he takes her up to the room. Now Lan is thinking in every way that he's using his wealth and his power to get something from me. Until she hears Cho say to her, no, I just want to watch you sleep tonight. I wanted you to experience one night of normality. And if it costs me everything I want, then that's worth it to me because I love you. She's first taken back by such an act of grace. She thinks he's trying to control her. But when she recognizes, when it dawns on her, that he wasn't using his wealth or his power to get something from her, but to serve her, by the time she wakes in the morning, she's changed and she cannot return to her occupation ever again. You see, the only thing that can change you and I is when we see it. And so listen, if you're taking notes, here's the points today. Number one, eternal life is not a reward for good people, but a gift for forgiven people. We can miss that. We can forget that. Because we might have received it as a gift in the beginning, but start to look at it as a reward. We have to constantly preach the gospel to ourselves. But it's a remembrance that eternal life, what God does for us, is never a reward for the good things we do, but always a gift that he provides for us. Eternal life is never a reward for good people, but a gift for forgiven people. And secondly, and just as importantly as this, grace celebrates restored relationships. See, you and I, when we have the heart of the Father, when we grow in grace, we come to realize what is valuable to God, what matters to God. We start to look beyond ourselves and realize that all the people I encounter in my world matter greatly to God. And who's the true elder brother that can win them? Last time I checked, Jesus called his church what? His body. How will they ever be reached? If we're really going to become like Christ, then we're going to care about what God cares about. We're going to long for what God longs for. We're not going to be into this for just what we can get out of it, but we're going to be looking to say, how can we please you, Father? How can our love be expressed? Because love is the most vulnerable. Love is the most fulfilling, though. The only thing that truly changes life is when love is given freely and received freely. And therefore, when we have understood understood the love of God. It changes us to such a degree that God has never given any of us what we deserve. No matter what we thought of life, none of us were good. All of us were wrong. Yet God loved every one of us. And when that grips us, when that internally changes us, it changes our whole way of thinking. And then we're out compelling people to come. We want this house to be filled. We want to see the heart of our Father overwhelmed with joy because we want to be in the celebration. We want to be the ones that help bring the lost home. That's the heart of the gospel. And therefore, grace celebrates restored relationships. As long as I'm angry, as long as I'm upset, I cannot forgive people that I feel superior to. And maybe there's some people in your life that you need to realize how much God has forgiven you of, that maybe, just maybe then, when you look through that paradigm, you can turn around and be gracious and forgive someone else who's wronged you. Maybe this might change the way you and I become. Imagine with me if the church became possessed with the understanding of grace and began to live that out, began to display that in our relationships with one another and our relationships with those who are without. The realization that God loves all of us equally. We were all wrong, and we're all called to recognize that and change. Imagine what this place might look like. Imagine if it got rumored about that Jesus was truly in the house. Maybe the tax collectors and sinners of our time would be crowding out this place, and you wouldn't have instantly your regular seat. You would actually have to do something for someone else. But imagine what joy there would be in the household of God.